This is Amud Yomi Gemara in Shabbos Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're holding on the very bottom of Tes Vavam Abeis, and we're in the middle of trying to figure out when and how is Klis Chuches Mikabel Toma. And the question is that we quoted a brisa that equated Klis Chuches to chol, to sand, that just like sand. And the Gemara's question was, said it should have the same din as kli cheres, which is not mitaher in the mikvah. So we answered on the bottom of Tezvav and Ubez a unique case that it's true. Glass usually cannot be purified in the mikvah. When do we say it could? Is if it got a hole, you plugged up that hole with metal, and according to Rameir, everything goes after the maimid, goes after the item that's holding it up, which over here is the metal, and that's when it could be purified in the mikvah. Asks the Gemara, Elameata. But if this is true, as we turn over to Tezayin Amud Aleph, Loili Tame Mikabon. If you're telling me that glass is learned out from chol, which is learned out from earthenware utensils, so glass should have no din of tuma mikabon on the outside of the item, just like earthenware cannot be mitame from the outside of the item. And we know this is not true. Alama Tanan. Why do we learn Kli Cheres, Kli Neser, Tomasan Shav, and earthenware vessel or Kli Neser? The Toma is equal, Mitaman, Umitamin Me'avirehen. They could become Tame. They could convey and make something else Tame via their Avirehen, their airspace, Umitaman Me'acharehen. And they as well could become tamei through achayreim, they're outside. However, ve'ein mitama migabein, only from achayreim and not migabein. And shvirasa mitarasan, and breaking them is mitar them. So says the Gemara, but glass is not true. And again, what's the difference me'achareim and migabein? So Rashi says in the first narrow line that achareim is when you have, let's say, two areas of a keli, one behind the next. So you can have like a second cavity behind the kli. That's when we're saying it's going to be makabel tuma. But migabeyan, by touching the back of the keli, it will not. Kli neser, kli charesu to tamas and shaveh. So what's the kasha? Articulates the Gemara. It seems only when it comes to Cheres and Neser, that's when the Tomazi Kolavel Midiachrini Lai. But glass, it's not true. Glass will not be Makabal Tama Miga Beyhem. So says the Gemara. But says the Gemara, so you told me, Reish Lakish, that glass is likely chayrez because techilas briyasan is from chol, is from sand. But we see clearly in this brisa that glass is not the same thing as kli chayrez. Answers the Gemara. Amri, they said, kim d'chinish tabru. Since if it is broken, yesh lahen takana. Glass that's broken, you could fix it. You melt it down and you can rebuild the glass utensil. Therefore, Shavinu Kikli Matachas has the same din as a metal keli that can be melted down and remade into the utensil. So the Gemara is saying that in reality, glass at some level is like chol, is like earthenware. But in also the din derabanan, it will have tuma like mateches, because it could be broken down and fixed like mateches. Says the Gemara, Elameata. If this is true, where 8 lines down, the first one line is Shavenu. Yachzul Tomas Yishana Kikli Matachais. It should go back to its original Toma when it's melted down, just like metal. You melt down metal, it doesn't lose its status of Toma. So too should be by glass. But the question is the Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, when it's flatware, when it's hollowware, whatever you do with the metal, it's still mikabel toma. Nishbaru, taharu. If they're broken, it's tar. Chazer vaser and kelim, you rebuild them into kelim. Chazer tomas yishana. It goes back to the original toma, because a metal item that is broken, melted, and rebuilt is not a new item, and therefore it still has the same toma on it. So what's the kasha? But by glass, It's not true. Now what do we learn? Kli eitz, a wooden item, kli or a leather item, kli atzim, a bone item, kli zchuches, a glass item, shutei tar. When it's flat, it's tar, mikablim tameim, and when it's hollow, umikableyan, it's tameim. Nishbaru, if it breaks, it's taru. Chazer v'oisim and kelim, mikablin tuma from when? Not like metal that it reverts backwards, but rather it's mikabel tuma, mikan ulaba. So says the Gemara, we see that glass is not the same thing as metal. Answers the Gemara, the Gemara articulates, mikan ulaba in lemafrei aloi. Answers the Gemara, Thomas klis chuches is derabanan, v'tomi yeshena derabanan, and the din that metal reverts back to its original tuma is also derabanan. So b'tuma daraisa, when it comes to tuma daraisa, chitu barabanan tuma, the rabbanan said on a metal item it reverts back to its original state of tuma. But b'tuma derabanan, by selling glass, lo yechitu derabanan tuma, it's not going to go back to its original tuma. And that's the reason why we're seeing over here that glass sort of floats in between. We started off, it's like kli chares, but it wasn't fully like kli chares because it's not, because it could go into a mikvah. We said that's because the Rabbanan has another. That's because the Rabbanan glass has another property. What's the other property of glass? That it can be melted down like metal. It doesn't revert back to its original tuma like metal. Says, well, you're right, because that's a din derabanan. So on the daraisa, it's going to be like metal, but not on the derabanan. But continues the Gemara, 3 lines on the bottom. The flatware of glass should be tamei. Because the fact that metal is tamei is a din daraisa. So therefore, glass should get that tuma derabanan. Says the Gemara, you're right in math. However, of the Behur Rabbanan Ekera, the Rabbanan made a hecker. The Rabbanan made a distinction, a differentiation between metal and glass. Why? So that if glass is tamei and it touches chuma and kachim, you don't go to burn chuma and kachim on it, meaning because it's only a tuma derabanan. We turn over to Zayin and Beis and we conclude that Rav Ashi Amar La'ila mikli chares tamu, really glass is like kli chares. But what was our kasha when we said it's like kli chares lo letamu migaban? It should not be tamei when it gets touched from the outside surface. Says the Gemara, Hayil v'nira teichli kibaro, a fascinating teretz. Because glass, you could see right through. Therefore, says Rav Ashi, touching the inside, touching the outside, it's going to have the same din because I could see through. A fascinating teretz. So we end off with 2 different mahalchim in glass. Either it's different from kli charetz, and we use kli matachais as the reason that glass has its dinim, or a new teretz says Rav Ashi, the reason why it's something from the outside is because you could see right through, and therefore will be the same tuma as inside. We'll just parenthetically point out in the world of tvilas kelim, this is the reason why glass needs to be taivel mamish for this svara, because glass has the same properties of metal, that when you melt it down, it could be fixed just like metal, and so much so as a tshuva Ramosha that wonders and maybe even suggests, it's not the minhag, that plastic should have the same qualities. A plastic utensil also can be melted down and put back together. It's not generally the accepted halacha, which are tefillas kelim. There are those, chazitzik, etc., which are machmir. But that's the story with glass and its kabbalah as tuma. We'll pick it up from Shimon ben Shatach in the next shiur b'siyata d'shmaya.